officer in the Law and Development Service of the Legal Office. In 2004, he was transferred to the World Bank in Washington, D.C. as the legal officer in the Environment and International Law Unit of the Legal Department. Later, he was appointed as the FAO representative in Madagascar and consequently in Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles. A national of Cameroon, Mr. Kukam holds, among other academic qualifications, a Doctor of Philosophy in International Law and Public Law from the University of Limoges in France. Over to you, Mr. Kukam.
Thank you, Masimba. Good morning again, colleagues, and a happy new year to everyone. As my colleagues mentioned before me, it was really a heartbreaking situation that we all saw during our recent mission in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado region. I will not come back again on what Lola mentioned regarding the food security and nutrition, the situation there. But what I will say was that that situation has completely destroyed the livelihoods of this population, given that most of them were farmers, fishermen, and they have all left what they had behind. And we could all imagine the situation they are living, not only not be able to do their usual activities, but really to rely on food assistance. As Lola mentioned, it's really important that we continue providing food assistance to these populations, but at the same time, they all mentioned to us that they all want to go back to do what they used to do. They all want to continue their agricultural activities. They all want to continue fishing. And so we were able, during our meetings with the local authorities, we really convey this willingness, this resilience attitude of the populations who want to go back to their own activities. So they want to continue cultivating. So we discussed with the local authorities the possibility of getting available lands for these populations, given that where they are today, they will not be there for a few weeks or few months. They might be there for several years, which means they really need to start cultivating. So the local authorities promised that they were trying to look for lands that they would make available for these populations to start cultivating. In the meantime, FAO started providing to this population the seeds for different crops, so that as soon as they get the lands, they can start cultivating. We also find that in the areas where they are currently displaced, they might also start doing some livestock activities. So it will be important to see how we can provide them with input for them to start doing some livestock activities. At the same time, we found that in these areas it will be very important to have some small-scale irrigation schemes. So I think, and this is an area where FAO and IFAD could work together to see how to provide some irrigation activities in those areas. The same for those who were used to do fishing. So it's important to provide those input for them to do fishing. What FAO is currently doing, we are currently providing, I say, the input and providing some seeds for this population. At the same time, we, as one of the output of the missions, we developed a 3-year program where we'll try to really to provide those support these populations in collaboration with other UN institutions for them to go back really to recover their activities. So this is really a few things that I could mention here, saying that we are really looking forward to the collaboration that we will have with all other UN institutions to provide the support to these populations. At the same time, as you know, it's important that to mobilize the resources. So the dialogue and discussions with the development partners, with the financial institutions is important so that we can have the financial resources that are needed for these activities to be undertaken. At the same time, continue also the discussion with the government, for the government also to provide the necessary resources that they are able to provide for these populations. So which means it's a really an urgent situation that we saw in Cabo Delgado. There is no time to waste. We need to act as soon as possible and to have really an an integrated approach where we have at the same time all the social aspects, including education, health, and agriculture, but also looking at the short-term and long-term vision for this population. I will stop here and thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takukam. We will now hear from Mr. Valentine Tapsoba, the Director of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, Regional Bureau for Southern Africa. His bureau covers 11 countries in the region and the Indian Ocean island countries. He has worked with UNHCR for the past 26 years in various leadership positions at both the Geneva headquarters and several field operations in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Ms. Tapsoba served in Burundi as the Deputy Representative in charge of operations and as representative in Sierra Leone before being appointed as the Regional Representative for UNHCR in West Africa. He also served as the UNHCR representative in Ethiopia and as the Director for the Regional Bureau for Africa. A national of Burkina Faso, Ms. Tapsoba holds a master's degree in economics from Ouagadougou University and a master's degree in international transactions from George Mason University in the United States. You have the floor, Ms. Tapsoba.
Thank you so much, Masimba, and good morning to all of you. Happy New Year. I must say that the situation in Cabo Delgado is dire. It is a humanitarian and protection crisis where human rights abuses on civilians occur every day. The international community cannot let this situation continue like that. I must say, Masimba, that you did mention 26 years with UNHCR. I have seldomly been exposed to such desolation, heard so many tales of violence, and seen so many scared looks. The situation in Cabo Delgado is appalling, and if nothing is done soon, we won't have only 535,000 displaced people, but several thousand. We won't have only 2,000 people killed by the conflict, but 10 of thousands. The people we met had to leave everything behind them, their homes, their land, their animals, their meager resources, even their identity document as they were fleeing for their lives. The situation keeps deteriorating. The number of displaced people is increasing every day, and we all need to act more and now if we want to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. UNHCR has had a presence in Cabo Delgado since November 2019 with an office in Pemba and a long-established presence in Nampula province for the refugee response. Our team keeps growing, and as this month, we have been able to assist more than 17,000 displaced people with shelter material and essential items such as blankets, mattresses, cooking sets, and planning to assist at least 160,000 people in 2021. Giving the protection and psychosocial needs, UNHCR also support community initiative and conduct protection monitoring in both IDP and host communities. We plan to assist 10 or 1,000 more people this year, provided we get sufficient funding and access to displacement areas. The situation in Cabo Delgado is above all a protection crisis where human rights abuses against civilians occur daily. When we were in Cabo Delgado last month, we were shocked to hear first and horrendous stories of abuses on families. Many people said their houses had been looted and burned down, their sources of livelihood destroyed. These brutal attacks happen in the context of extreme poverty and inequalities, with many parents unable to send their kids to school or feed their children, nor offer a roof over their head. The level of insecurity is having a dangerous psychological impact on men, women, and children who consistently fear they can be attacked at any moment. The situation is dire. We are therefore increasing the number of staff directly working with the community to document human rights abuses and initiate activities to replace the loss of livelihood. We visited also in Nanja settlement, women who were grateful for our assistance, but who shared their frustration for lack of food and lack of water. You gave us buckets. One lady was saying that you gave us bucket, but there is no water. So it means that we need definitely to scale up. The lack of civil documents is also a compelling issue. Many people left ID documents behind them, fleeing for their life. UNHCR has set up legal clinics to help those people in their quest to recover an identity through new documents. Without them, it is impossible to get a job, send your children to school, or restart a new life. I am worried about the wandering children and teenagers. I think Julita said it also. I saw in the settlement I visited in Akwaba and Mutuj districts. They are not going to school, and if nothing is done, Mozambique civil will definitely inherit a lost generation. It is urgent to make sure the displaced children can access education. One young teenage boy I talked to said that he is struggling to project himself in the future and to make plans. Here again, we need to work together with UNICEF, UNESCO, other education organizations, and the government to ensure a more positive future for the young people who are victims of violence and displacement. Shelter remains a worrying preoccupation. 90% of the IDP stay with host families who did not hesitate to open their homes to family members, friends, or even to complete strangers fleeing violence. But those daily host families are now confronted with even more limited resources and space issues. We visited a family in Pemba who was hosting 66 people. IDPs were accommodated in one room, sleeping on the floor and sharing only one latrine. Women and children were exposed to promiscuity and illness, including COVID-19, as you can imagine, in such a confined and crowded environment. Finally, we also need to make sure we get full access to help the IDPs and that any bureaucracy slowing down the delivery of assistance is lifted. We presently have a 16-track full of assistance stuck at the border between Tanzania and Maputo since the 23rd of December. I will conclude by saying that in addition to assisting IDPs, UNHCR is also providing international protection to some more than 28,000 refugees and asylum seekers based in Nampula province. And we would like definitely to rely on you, the media, to report on the dramatic situation in the province. I stop here, Masimba. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tapsoba. Our next speaker is Mrs. Alessandra Casaza, who is the manager of UNDP's Resilience Hub in Nairobi. She has over 20 years of experience working with the UNDP at the country, regional, and global level, and with the private sector, both in New Zealand and in her home country, Italy. She has served with UNDP as an advisor in the regional offices of Addis Ababa and Bangkok, and at the country level in Sri Lanka and Timor-Leste. Prior to joining UNDP, Ms. Casaza worked for KPMG in Italy as auditor and advisor on corporate social responsibility and business ethics. Ms. Casaza is a Master of Science degree in Development Economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, among other qualifications. Ms. Casaza, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good morning and bon dia to everyone in this call. I will address the press from the long-term development angle of the crisis in Cabo Delgado. And I would like to begin by saying that UNDP has been very pleased to be part of this very important mission. UNDP, as you know, has a long history of working with the government of Mozambique to provide long-term development solutions to its people. And we are at this very important moment during this crisis very committed to contribute to address the crisis. You have heard from my colleagues that we have traveled to Cabo Delgado and we have had the opportunity to meet with the people, particularly those that have been forced to leave their homes because of the violence, that have taken refuge in other parts of Cabo Delgado and resettled, particularly in Chure, Anquabe, and Pemba. These are the areas that we have been able to visit. We have also been able to speak with the host community. And in our discussions, we have been able to hear about their plight and the challenges that these people have been facing at this very difficult time. I want to say that during our visit, we could witness that this crisis is really unfolding on three different fronts. This is together a humanitarian crisis, this is a security crisis, and this is also a development crisis, which requires urgent action and investment in all these three fronts concomitantly. We need to respond to the humanitarian crisis. We need to support the government to restore the security situation in Cabo Delgado. And we need to also provide support to invest in long-term development solutions. What we have seen during our visit in Cabo Delgado is also that this is not a crisis that is confined to Cabo Delgado only. This spans across the border with Mozambique and, with Tanzania and Malawi. This is a crisis that has cross-border dimensions. It requires support for strengthening cooperation amongst the bordering countries, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Malawi, particularly to bring long-term development in border areas. This means investing in cross-border trade, promoting access to social infrastructure, to social services, building governance institutions, promoting social cohesion, and generating particularly economic opportunities for these communities in borderland areas to prosper. What we have found in our work in UNDP is that extremist and armed groups really thrive in border areas where there is a development and an institutional vacuum, and therefore bringing development, long-term development solutions in these remote places would really reduce the opportunities for the recruitment and the support to these armed groups. What I would like to say is that UNDP remains very committed to work under the leadership of the UN resident coordinator and very closely with the UN country team in Mozambique to support the government to respond to this crisis. We see that we can contribute in three key priority areas. The first priority area for UNDP is that of continuing supporting the displaced populations to recover from the crisis and to integrate within the host community. We will continue supporting this community to access basic social services and livelihood opportunities. What we have seen is that there are no indication, at least for the moment, that the people that have fled their homes, that had to leave their homes because of the violence and resettle in other parts of Cabo Delgado will be able to return to their places of birth anytime soon, not in the near future. And we see that it is very critical. It's very important that we, as the United Nations and UNDP, support the integration of these people within their host community, the local community that have offered hospitality to these people, to the displaced. This means ensuring that they have access to social infrastructure, to basic services. It is important that we promote access to jobs, to livelihood opportunities, safe housing. And very importantly, it is also critical that we support the peaceful and harmonious coexistence of the displaced population with their host communities. The second priority where we will invest our resources is that of promoting cross-border cooperation and investment in long-term development in borderlands. UNDP is currently working with the government of Mozambique and very closely with our colleagues in WFP and also IOM and other parts of the UN system and development partners to promote cross-border cooperation to lay the foundations for long-term development in the areas bordering Mozambique and Tanzania. This for us means investing in social cohesion, in preventing the further spreading of violent extremism. We will invest in strengthening local governments and access to services, basic services, access to justice and the protection of human rights, and also the promotion of economic development in border areas for these communities to prosper. Our third area of priority is that of building resilience of people and institutions in the northern part of Mozambique, including Cabo Delgado. UNDP is currently working with partners, the World Bank and the African Development Bank, to support the government in the development of a new strategy for resilience and development in the north. We are committed to build on the work that we have done in the aftermath of cyclones Idai and Kenneth, and to continue working with the rest of the UN system and development partners to build the resilience of the people in the north, to recover from this crisis, but also to transform its economy, the economy in the north, and the institutions of the state. For us, building resilience means investing in long-term development. That means stability, social cohesion. It means ensuring access to renewable and affordable energy for the people living in the north part of Mozambique, social infrastructure, basic services, access to housing, governance, and particularly access to economic opportunities and prosperity. In concluding, I would like just to mention that UNDP is committed to leverage all its assets at the country, at the regional, at the global level to support the government of Mozambique to respond to this crisis. I want to mention we have recently established and opened the Africa Borderlands Center and the Resilience Hub here in Nairobi. We bring knowledge and expertise on how to invest in development in borderlands and also on how to build resilience. And we would like to, of course, offer these assets to the government of Mozambique and to the rest of the UN system to respond to this crisis more effectively and efficiently. We are concerned about the situation in Cabo Delgado, and we are committed to do our part to contribute to the response, to address the root causes of the crisis and to promote long-term development. I want to mention that our approach to addressing this crisis is founded on the principle of human development, which puts people really at the center of what we do, empowering people expanding their opportunities and choices to live the life that they choose. This is in line with the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the African Union 2063 Agenda for the Africa we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kasaza. Finally, we will hear from Mrs. Sara Bagobunu, who is the Director for East and Southern Africa Division of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Ms. Bagobunu brings to IFAD rich work experience spanning more than 20 years in the agriculture sector across Africa. She has also led and managed in other development organizations in the design of development projects and capacity building programs. Prior to joining IFAD, Ms. Bagobunu worked at the World Bank as a senior agricultural economist for the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo. Ms. Bagobunu holds, among others, a master's degree in business administration from Maastricht School of Management in the Netherlands. You have the floor, Ms. Bagobunu.
Good morning, colleagues and members of the press. Thank you, Mr. Msimba, for your moderation as well of this very important session and a debriefing event. As the last presenter in this forum, I just want to echo the sentiments of urgency and responsibility as expressed by Dr. Julita, Charles, Lola, and Patrice this morning. The International Fund for Agricultural Development expresses solidarity with the government of the people of Mozambique to the loss of lives and the displacement of 500,000 persons due to the attacks and instability in Cabo Delgado, which has created a serious humanitarian crisis, even in the wakes of the cyclones Idai and Kenneth. So just to reiterate, we continue and are committed to support smallholder farmers specifically and other vulnerable groups that are at the mercy of what is ongoing in Cabo Delgado to essentially reinforce economic and social resilience, support the recovery of their assets and economic base, and rebuild their lives in a sustainable manner. IFAD supports to Mozambique is fully aligned with the government's vision to promote sustainable economic growth, productivity, and job creation by unlocking the productive potential in the Mozambican economy, both in the blue economy and the wider rural economy. We know that this is completely aligned with the rural development strategy that has been laid out. And in that, we want to be sure that IFAD financing really reaches the most vulnerable and the most poor, targeting in all of its operations 50% women and 30% youth, because that's where the transformation will happen. To address and safeguard and rebuild livelihoods hardest hit by the triple crisis of climate, COVID-19, and conflict, IFAD has been able to mobilize $85 million US to allocate to approximately 314,000 households across Mozambique under the IFAD current financing cycle, which ends the end of this year. 80% of this financing is grant resources. Approximately 40 million of that resource is going to be invested over the course of this and the next couple of years in 3 operations that seek to reach 55,000 households in the northern Cabo Delgado zone and neighboring provinces. We are looking at fishery and aquaculture investment, known as PRODAPE, PROCAVA, which is unlocking wealth in several value chains and trying to support young people to access those and women opportunities in those, and support to the financial sector through the RIFIP program. In addition to this, because these resources are not necessarily enough, IFAD is partnering with the Green Climate Fund to mobilize and unlock a further 50 million to try and meet the important ambition of creating opportunities of state sustainability. We know for equitable and inclusive sustainable growth in the country, promoting rural connectivity, mobility, and investing in infrastructure, basic infrastructure for those of which the people of Cabo Delgado now do not have access is absolutely important. Building and laying the ground for the crowding in of sustainable investments, to partner with the private sector to create temporary jobs, to rebuild productive capacities, foster stabilization and recovery of the zone is absolutely and imperatively urgent. We also know that the disruptions created by the COVID-19 pandemic has left many smallholder farmers unable to actually plant for the next cropping season, as Patrice and others have already mentioned. So it is absolutely imperative to try to get these resources into that zone as quickly as possible. We know that 25% of Mozambican gross domestic product is reliant on agriculture, but only receives 5% of the investment. We want this to change. We also know that about 420,000 young people are being introduced to the labor market each year, and only 18,000 new jobs are currently being created with the current structure of the economy, and we must really change this. The Nacala, Beira, and Maputo corridors are essential not only for Mozambique, as has already been mentioned, but 4 out of the 6 neighboring countries are relying on those ports as conduits to global markets, and we must support this. So there is a big financing gap for the Mozambican economy, particularly in Cabo Delgado, to reach its ambitions to stabilize and create sustainable jobs that give alternatives to rural communities. IFAD in its financing cycle for IFAD 12 is ambitious. It's trying to mobilize the 3.8 billion program of work, which will total 11.1, with a specific focus on enhanced adaptation of smallholder agricultural program that is going to crowd in the needed adaptation and mitigation capacities against climate, which is essential for Mozambique and other countries. In addition, we have a private sector financing program that is ready to partner and support and work directly with the private sector to crowd in those needed investments. This is an ambitious move. IFAD would like to actually mobilize 40% more resources than it has done in its former financing cycle. And this is absolutely important if it is going to be able to support and work together with the wider UN family in meeting our goals for peace, stability, and recovery and sustainable development that is much needed across the northern part of Mozambique. I want to close by also stating that in the area, in order to arrive at joint work, at joint programming, collaboration through all stakeholders is absolutely key. And this can only be done in partnership and listening to local communities, the local authorities, who define and have a very clear ambition for transformation of rural economy and agriculture, and building on what they have in terms of their ambitions for unlocking the wealth in fish and agriculture and livestock will be the starting point of all this. Thank you, Msimba and all colleagues. I know in the interest of time, I would just like to stop there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mbagobunu. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for questions in English, Portuguese, or French. Please feel free to write your questions in the chat box before you ask your question. We kindly request that you state your name, your organization, or the media house and the country you are based in. I am mindful of the time, and I do apologize for running behind the scheduled time. We will continue for a while to give more time for questions from the press. The first question I have right now is from Andrew Meldrum of the Associated Press, based in Johannesburg, and is directed towards UNHCR. The question is, are displaced populations dispersed around Cabo Delgado, or are they being housed in camps? Are they able to grow their own food? are they able to get healthcare, clean water, schooling, and other essential services? Over to you, Ms. Tapsoba.
Yes, thank you so much. No, what we have visited, the government has has come up with sites, identified sites, so that the IDP, the internally displaced people, could be moved to those sites. But what we have seen also is that there were boreholes, but it was not enough water for everybody. And this is why we are saying that definitely before even moving people from a place A to B, we have to have at least the minimum. We know that we are in an emergency situation, but the minimum, you cannot just move people and dump them where you don't have the minimum services for them. In terms of food, I may ask Patrice to complement, but we have been taken to farms where the government has given plots to the IDPs so that they could farm, and we had seen a cassava plantation and so forth that they have started because now it is the rainy season. This is what I can say. But in terms of health, we have seen, for example, UNFPA had set up tents and so forth so that people could at least get the minimum services in terms of healthcare. Food, Lola said it. We had also interviewed some people who were telling us that they have only 1 meal per day, and they eat in the afternoon. When they eat in the afternoon, they have to wait for the next day to get something to eat. Over to you, Masimba.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tapsoba. The next question I have is from Peter Fabricius of the Daily Maverick. See any evidence that the insurgents are allowing or encouraging non-economic activities such as farming in the areas they control, for example, around Mosimbayo, Daprai? Maybe we could ask IFAD or FAO to respond to the question.
Good. Sorry, Masimba, I didn't hear very well the question. It was the connection was not very good.
Okay, here's the question again. Did you see any evidence that the insurgents are allowing or encouraging normal activities such as farming in the areas they control? For example, around Mosimbayo, Daprai.
I thank you for the question. I think it would be difficult for us to answer directly to that question because we did not have access to those areas that are controlled by insurgents. Our mission was in the cities, in the areas where the IDPs are currently settled. And what is sure is that if they have left